A friend once told me that there were supposed to be 4 new evolutions for Eevee in Pokemon Gold and Silver. The 2 that are already in the game are Espeon, a Psychic type, and Umbreon, a Dark type. The other 2 were dropped from the game. These were Poison and Ghost types. I wasn't convinced that this was true, so I decided to see for myself by trying a beta version of Pokemon Gold. The beta ROM was hard to find, because most of the ROMs were either normal, not beta, Japanese, or just didn't work. When I finally found a working ROM, I loaded it up to search up for the new Eevee evolutions, and I wasn't quite sure what to do to get an Eevee to evolve into a Poison or Ghost type, so I just played the game normally and figured that I would find it out at some point. I eventually ended up beating the entire Elite Four and all of Kanto. The game was pretty much the same, other than a few different locations, dialogue, etc. Oh, and Dunsparce never seemed to appear, but I won't complain too much about that. I don't really like Dunsparce. But by the time I'd beaten the game, I still hadn't figured out how to evolve my Eevee. I tried leveling up at night, day, in caves, etc. And after hours of trying, I decided to find the evolutions the easy way. By cheating. I tried to use game shortcodes, but most of them did nothing. So I decided to ask online for help, and somebody on Newsgrounds told me that he could work on a code that would give me all the items. After a few days, he sent me back a code that I loaded into the Game Shark. I loaded the beta ROM up, and sure enough, the code gave me every single item in the game. I looked through the items, and everything was the same, except for an item called the Toxic Stone. Now I knew this is what I was looking for. I used it on my Eevee and nothing happened. The game simply told me it has no effect. I tried over and over, but nothing. I was pissed. Was this all I got after I went through this damn game? There had to be something that I did wrong, so I thought maybe the NPCs could help me out. I got the typical text from the NPCs. Man, that Team Rocket sure are persistent. I love my Jigglypuff. Have you visited the radio tower in the Kanto region? But one NPC told me something that stood out. Did you know that there's a certain stone that can evolve a Pokemon after it has fainted? This was where I went wrong. I had to use the Toxic Stone on my Eevee after it had fainted. At least, I hope so. My Eevee didn't take any time to be defeated, especially considering it was around level 40, and I was in a level 60 area. After it was defeated, I went into my bag and used the Toxic Stone on my fainted Eevee. What's this? Eevee is evolving. Yes, finally! Eevee has evolved into Zombreon. This was not what I was thinking. Zombreon looked like a normal Eevee, but was green coloured, and parts of it were missing. Also, its cry was just a lowered version of Eevee's. Oh, and once it evolved, it learned a new attack, called Zombite. But this was all I worked for? A recoloured Eevee? Come on! I calmed down a bit, and decided to test it out in the tall grass near Newbark. A wild Sentret appeared, and I threw out Zombreon. I figured it would be pointless to use a move that I had used a million times, like Tackle or Flash, so I used Zombite instead. The attack animation was odd. It looked like Bite, but with 2 poison symbols flashing near the teeth. The attack was a one-hit KO according to the text box. But what was strange was that the game was asking me if I would like to nickname Sentret, and it told me that Sentret was sent to the PC. I didn't use any kind of Pokeballs, so why did the game say that I caught the Sentret? I rushed over to the PC and checked for the Sentret, and it wasn't a normal Sentret anymore. It was now green, a poison type, and had the move Zombite. Wait, I know what's going on. Every time I used the attack Zombite, which I figured means Zombie Bite, the enemy Pokemon would get infected and join my team. This was pretty obvious considering Zombreon was basically Zombie in Eon. I wondered, what would happen if I infected a trainer's Pokemon? I used Fly to go to one of the routes in Kanto that I had skipped most of, and ran into a trainer. The battle started, the opposing trainer threw out a Kadabra, and I immediately chose Zombite. It was a one-hit KO, but rather than throwing out the next Pokemon, the imposing trainer just came out and said, "What did you do to my Pokemon?" The battle was won, and I received the XP and money. After the battle, the trainer was simply gone. Just gone. In fact, no other trainers were there either. This began to creep me out a little bit, and I walked around the area to look for another trainer, but found no one. When I walked into the grass, a wild Kadabra appeared, although this wasn't a normal Kadabra, it was green and zombie-like just like the Sentret was. And I didn't even have to fight it, it just lost all of its health and the game told me that I had caught it. I began to get a little creeped out, so I began to head back into town when another wild Pokemon appeared. It was a normal looking Raticate. I didn't want to fight it, so I pressed run. It didn't work. Zombreon is staring at the foe hungrily, the game told me. Then the Raticate attacked Zombreon with Bite, but after the Bite animation played, the game said Zombreon countered the attack with Zombite, and the Zombie Bite animation plays, causing the Raticate to lose all of its health and join my team. I wanted to get out of this area immediately, so I went into my team to use Fly, and I wasn't expecting what I saw. All of my Pokemon were green and zombified, and all of them now knew Zombite. I made my Lugia use Fly and take me to Saffron City. When I got there, all of the NPCs were there, which helped me to relax a little bit. I decided to go into the Pokemon Center to check on the PC, and when I did, the game let out an ear-splitting beep that made me jump a little. In front of the center's counter was the trainer with the Kadabra that I had defeated earlier. A text box came up. That's the man that hurt my Kadabra. Then that trainer ran into the corner of the Pokemon Center. A man that was sat on one of the seats walked up to me and said, "Don't worry, I'll stop him." But then I was forced to battle him. He threw out an Arcanine and I sent out Zombreon. I tried to use Tackle, and it worked. But after the animation finished, the game said, Zombreon used Tackle, followed by Zombite. The battle ended, and the game went back to the Pokemon Center. A greenish sprite of the Arcanine stood next to the man. "What happened to my Arcanine? What are you?" the man said before he ran out of the Pokemon Center. The Arcanine then walked up to me, and the game had told me that I had caught the Arcanine, and it was sent to the PC. Then the Arcanine sprite disappeared. This was starting to get creepy. I tried talking to the trainer in the corner, but all he would say was, "Please, no more." I tried talking to the nurse, but all she would say was, "Get out of my Pokemon Center." I checked the PC, and sure enough, I had zombified versions of all of the Pokemon from earlier. When I had backed out of the PC, I noticed that a new option on the PC screen. It was called Release All. I tried pressing it, but it told me, not enough Zom Pokemon. Darn. I walked out of the center, and the speakers of my computer were filled with large barrages of high and low pitched beeps, and all of the NPCs outside of the center dashed towards the exits of the city. I tried to speak to one of them, but they were moving too quickly and I couldn't even do anything. When I walked out of the town, there were no trainers around. I figured if I went to a different town, everything would be normal, so I made my Lugia fly to Goldenrod. When I landed there were no NPCs here either, and the music wasn't playing. I tried walking into a building, but the game then told me, the door is locked. I tried a few other buildings, but they were locked up too. So I went to the Pokemon Center, and the door opened as it usually would, and I walked inside. Nobody was inside of it, but I noticed something new. There was what appeared to be a radio on the counter. When I interacted with it, a text box came up. "Beware of strange Pokemon. trainers from the Kanto region have been reporting strange green Pokemon attacking and infecting other Pokemon and trainers. Remain indoors and avoid all contact with strange Pokemon and people. Followed by, I'm so lonely. I now figured that there was nothing to do down here, so I walked to the second floor. On the second floor there were a bunch of NPCs, standing still, facing the stairs. Once I got to the top of the stairs, a loud beep played, and a text box appeared saying, "Get out of here. You aren't normal." A trainer standing in front of the crowd then ran up to me, and a battle begun. The opposing trainer sent out a Ditto, and I sent out Zombreon. I tried using Flash, but instead, the game told me Zombreon spat poison at Ditto, and Ditto was defeated. After the battle, the man backed up into the crowd. Suddenly Zombreon walked out, and the game said, Zombreon can't wait any longer. And Zombreon ran into the crowd, touching every trainer and Pokemon. When it touched Pokemon, they would turn green, but when it touched trainers, the game would let out a loud beep, and then the trainer would vanish. Once all of the trainers were gone, and all of the Pokemon were infected, a text box said, Jigglypuff, Abra, Ditto and Clefairy were sent to the PC, and then the Pokemon disappeared. I checked my trainer card because I remembered the trainer from earlier, saying I wasn't normal. Surely enough, my trainer was zombified too. I felt kinda sick. Would Game Freak really do something like this? I shook off the feeling and tried to fly to a different town, but the game had told me, Lugia is too weak to fly. Great. I went back into the center to get a new flying Pokemon from the PC, but when I looked inside, all of the Pokemon in the PC were now infected. I tried to take out my Pidgeotto, but pressing the withdraw button would just play a buzz sound that would usually play when you aren't allowed to do something. I couldn't move Pokemon either, so there was only one thing left to do. I saved the game first. I then pressed the Release All button. The game then asked, would you like to release all Zom Pokemon? Yes. All Zom Pokemon have now been released. I checked the box, and now all of my Pokemon in the PC were gone. I was confused. What is the purpose of an option like this? I walked outside and I got quite the surprise. Parts of buildings were on fire, and windows were boarded up, and NPCs were running from green Pokemon. I couldn't interact with the Pokemon or the trainers, so I decided to walk out of the town. The area outside of the town was similar in a way. The trees were on fire, and there were grey particles moving in front of the screen, which made it look like it was all smoky. Walking into the tall grass didn't cause any wild Pokemon to appear, but I could talk to the small amount of NPCs that were standing around. They would say things like, I had to hit my poor Pikachu with a stick. He just wouldn't stop trying to bite me. Who started this? I want this all to end, and I want to go home to my family. I eventually walked to Violet City, then to Cherry Grove City, and finally, to New Bark Town. This was the only place that was normal, sort of. The trainers that walked around outside the buildings weren't there anymore, and I went into the Pokemon lab to see if it was empty too. It wasn't. Inside was a single professor. Once I took a step forward, an exclamation mark appeared above his head, and he walked up to me. I finally finished it. A gene that protects my Pokemon from that poison stuff that has caused all the Pokemon to turn strange. This is where it all began, and this is where it will end, he said, causing a battle to begin. The game then said, Professor Elm would like to battle. He sent out a level 86 for Alligator, and I threw out Zombreon. I knew Zombreon was too weak to handle this, so I swapped to Lugia. When I tried to use any attack other than Zombite, Lugia would end up using it anyway. And when Lugia did, I would get a message that said, it has no effect on Feraligatr. After this, the opposing Feraligatr used an attack, called Cure, that was super effective, and defeated Lugia right away. My next Pokemon was my Typhlosion, but the battle went almost the same as it did for Lugia. I tried using Flamethrower, but instead Typhlosion used Zombite, and was instantly defeated by Cure. The battle went on like this through every single one of my Pokemon, until I got to Zombreon. I pressed Zombite at this point because I knew it was coming. It didn't work, and Feraligatr used Cure. Zombreon was brought down to 1 HP. The game said, Zombreon refuses to give up. Zombreon used Struggle. Feraligatr was instantly defeated, and Zombreon was defeated by the recoil. Professor Elm came up and said, "No, no, no!" And then the battle ended. After the battle, Professor Elm took a step back and said, "I lost. It's over. It's all over. I want to end this pointless game right now." And then he ran out of the lab. After a few seconds, a text box appeared saying, "You hear a loud bang in the distance." I think I know what that meant. I went outside and a text box came up. Why did this have to happen? I didn't understand who said this, since there was nobody around. I thought maybe someone was in my character's house, so I headed there. Inside was my mother. She was sitting on a chair in the house as she usually did. I tried interacting with her. She definitely wasn't doing anything usual. It's Mum. She's not moving. The text actually made me feel quite sad. But I didn't expect the screen to cut to black after the text box closed. The screen faded from black into the opening screen where you would have the option to name your character. But my character just stood there, and the text below said, "All of this is my fault. All of these poor people. My mother, Eevee." But was it really my fault? My character then glared at the screen for a split second, and it cut to black. And then the game went straight to the credits. Nothing was different, all of the Pokemon were there as usual, and once the credits were over, the emulator froze. Now whenever I tried to load the beta ROM, the emulator would just freeze. I realised that this was only one of the 2 evolutions for Eevee. The ghost one was probably in Pokemon Silver. I can't imagine what would happen with this evolution of Eevee, and I don't want to know. And that, my dorks, was Zombreon, written by Ralzor123. My thoughts on this story? Even if it's not realistic, by the terms that Game Freak would never properly make something like this, I still really enjoyed this creepypasta. As you're all aware, I am a massive fan of zombies, Walking Dead in particular, so seeing a zombie thing in Pokemon naturally piqued my interests. Somebody could definitely pull this off if they knew how to ROM hack, and I would really love somebody to make a game of Zombreon. The screenshots that were provided with this story, and the overall context and things, could really give this a chance of becoming reality if somebody knew how to tinker with the game's code. There's no blood or anything ridiculous. There were some cliches in there, but overall I could excuse them because they weren't in it for long, and they didn't drive the overall story. I also give it points for its originality. I don't think I've seen a Pokepasta like Zombreon before. If there is one flaw I can give this story, is that some parts of the grammar were a little off, and some words could have been replaced with something else. But in my personal opinion, the spelling mistakes don't nearly cost this thing a fail. Zombreon passed in my eyes. So if I had to give this story a final rating out of 10, Zombreon catches itself a 7 out of 10. Like in my original review. Except, you know, my voice isn't super high pitched, and I don't talk at a million miles per hour. I apologise also again if my narration is a bit off. I'm still ill while recording this, but I tried my best. If you guys enjoyed the video, and you'd like to see me do some more, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, hit the bell so you're always up to date with my latest videos, and once again thank you for the support everybody, and share this video with your friends as well, because I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs. I'll see you all later. Take care, my dorks.